Rawls' two principles of justice. John Rawls offered the most significant philosophical theory of justice in the 20th century. At a time when it was thought no longer possible to create a grand ethical theory, Rawls revived the idea of the social contract as the transcendental condition of a truly inclusive, participatory society in which people experience both freedom and equality. The social contract was a device used by philosophers such as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau to explain how, from an original agreement amongst people, one could account for a particular form of political government. Rawls creates his imagined social contract from what he calls the original position. In the original position, the different people deciding what rules should apply to their society know nothing about their personal characteristics. They don't know their skin color, their gender, their intelligence, their strength, their family connections. Rawls calls this the veil of ignorance. Not knowing what they will be like in the society which emerges from their deliberations, the actors are limited in their ability to choose selfishly. Original sin is not limited per se, but the actors' blindness to their own interests limits the effects of original sin. You won't vote for special rights for tall people or for large families if you don't know what height you are or how many children you have. Such blindness also means, however, that the actors lack knowledge of the relationships which will sustain their lives and make them meaningful. Whereas real people live in community and share lasting attachments, the actors in Rawls's original position are entirely ignorant of what the nature of these attachments is or will be for them. Now, Rawls says that the first rule that is likely to appeal to people choosing under such conditions is that everyone should have the same rights, the same say, the same goods. However, Rawls points out that if everyone has the same, the person with skills as a blacksmith doesn't get any more iron than the person with skills as a farmer, and the person with skills as a glassmaker doesn't get any more sand than the person with skills as a baker. Rawls suggests, therefore, that persons choosing under the veil of ignorance would agree to some inequalities in resources, provided that as a result of those inequalities, everyone was better off. So if everyone is better off because the blacksmith has more iron and the glassmaker has more sand, those departures from equality are morally justified. However, there are, Rawls thinks, some things so important they cannot be traded. They must always remain equal. So from his original position, Rawls derives two principles of justice. The first is that each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with a similar liberty for others. The basic liberties identified by Rawls are the conventional civil liberties: freedom of speech, freedom from arbitrary arrest, freedom of conscience, and freedom to hold personal property. These liberties are primary because they enable citizens to exercise their sense of justice and to pursue their conception of the good. Rawls's second principle is that social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so they're both A, reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage, and B, attached to positions and offices open to all. This second principle of justice Rawls calls the difference principle, since, according to the second principle, subject to the preservation of the basic liberties guaranteed by the first principle of justice, the aim of government must be to maximize the resources available to the worst off. Inequalities are only permissible to the extent they leave the poorest better off than they would have been in a society in which everyone had the same. Inequalities are only justified inasmuch as the least advantaged are better off with them than they would be without them. Rawls calls this rule the maxi-min rule because it requires that the situation of those with the least be maximized. For Rawls, justice does not require equality, but enough. Rawls's difference principle and maxi-min rule are clearly attractive to some Christians. They seem to explain how universal regard and a bias to the poor can be effectively combined. They require social justice and differences within society to be assessed in terms of their impact on the least advantaged. Moreover, the difference principle means I'm only able to take advantage of my talents to the extent that others also benefit from their exercise. For example, the freedom of the entrepreneur to make a profit is to be judged in terms of its potential to create jobs for the poor. So closely does the difference principle seem to reflect the Christian ethics espoused by some thinkers that Duncan Forrester suggests that the difference principle adopted by Rawls was originally derived from the Judeo-Christian tradition and is now so deeply embedded in Western culture that it is regarded as more or less self-evident. Now, that's an interesting observation because Rawls seeks to construct his theory not on the basis of irrefutable logical conclusions from incontrovertible premises, but rather on the basis that it constitutes a reflective equilibrium, i.e., that is the conclusion we would come to after a process of examining and refining all our initial judgments about what is just and unjust into a coherent whole. Rawls's principles of justice, therefore, are attractive not primarily because of their intellectual rigor, but because they fit with our intuitions about what a just society should look like. Rawls's thought needs to be understood by reference to his intellectual biography. As a young man, John Rawls was planning to become an Episcopalian priest. But his experience of the jingoism of chaplains in the US Army as he fought in the war against Japan in World War II, and his experience of the horrors of the Holocaust caused him to lose his faith. He wrote a little piece in the 1990s called On My Religion, explaining that he rejected Christianity on moral grounds because he found its doctrines of original sin, heaven and hell, salvation by true belief, and its description of God as morally unacceptable. Rawls placed his faith in reason, a reason which, like Kant, he thought could tell us what is the right thing to do, regardless of whether God exists or not. The most successful criticisms of Rawls have both been those which point out that the way in which he constructs his original position already ensures that he will get out of it the principles for an individualistic but left-leaning liberal society. The actors in the original position are cut off from the knowledge of the communities which they inhabit, the families they belong to, and the relationships which are significant to them. Moreover, although the persons in the original position know they have their own conception of the good life, and that that conception may differ from the conceptions held by others, they do not know what that conception is. They do not know what their personal ideals and values may be. Rawls seems to regard these aspects of human identity as separable from the core of what makes us human. Michael Sandel disagrees. He says a person is not detachable from the position, commitments, and characteristics they have in society. Sandel comments, if utilitarianism fails to take seriously our distinctiveness, Rawls's justice as fairness fails to take seriously our commonality. Now, Rawls's theory stands as heir to two important traditions in philosophy. One I've already mentioned, the tradition of social contract theory used by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, a way of thinking about society is constituted by an imagined social contract between people. The other is the tradition of thought flowing through Immanuel Kant. Rawls's theory is sometimes described as Kantian constructivism. The device of the original position is a means of applying Kant's categorical imperative, act as though the principle of your action were to become the principle of actions in general, applying that principle to the foundation of a human society. Rawls tries to develop an account of what it is right to do that involves as little discussion as possible of what it is good to do. However, he recognizes you cannot avoid discussing the good entirely. Rawls believes the actors in the original position will rely on what he calls the thin theory of the good in forming their society. According to the thin theory of the good, there are certain goods which one will want, whatever else one wants. Whatever my particular life plan, I will need liberty, opportunity, income, and wealth to pursue it. These social primary goods will therefore be included in the agreement to form the just society reached in the original position. Some of Rawls's critics, such as Nigel Simmons, object that through the device of the thin theory of the good, Rawls biased his theory towards bourgeois individualist conceptions of the good life. For example, the social primary goods which Rawls identifies might be considerably less useful to me. My conception of the good life is to live in a monastery rather than work as a trader on Wall Street. Rawls's conclusions from his original position depend on his situation within liberal democratic society, and the goods of freedom and equality of opportunity to which he gives priority are those which liberal democratic societies prize above all others. Nicholas Waterstock points out, though Rawls's theory of justice is an inherent natural rights theory, he does nothing at all to develop an account of such rights. He simply assumes their existence. Rawls's theory is also proved difficult to put into effect. Nicholas Sagovsky comments, Rawls's theory of justice is based upon a thought experiment, the original position, in which the realities of social power are methodologically excluded, because we do not know which of the social participants are male or female, black or white, intelligent or stupid, strong or weak. Though this may give us access to rational principles for the fair distribution of social goods, it does not address the chronic and endemic unfairness in the distribution of power and advantage within actual societies. Rawls gives us two principles of justice, but they're principles of justice conceived in a philosopher's armchair, not in interacting with and understanding the lived experience of those who are oppressed and experience injustice.